Welcome, friends, to this live stream for Empty Cloud Monastery. I'd like to begin, as usual, by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammam sangham namasami. So welcome everyone to this Dhamma sharing, and the topic of this session is traveling light. I'd like to speak a bit about the upadhis. Upadhis, the mostly translated as acquisitions, the things that we acquire, the baggage. I have the memory of reading the beautiful book by John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress. I expect some of you might have read it. And just that image of Christian, the pilgrim, setting off on his journey to the goal, the spiritual goal. And he starts off with this huge burden on his back. Like a big rucksack, but massive and heavy and clinging to him, isn't it? And then as he goes along on his pilgrimage, he learns about goodness, about virtue, about wisdom, the way, and he lets go of unwholesome states. And as he goes along, his burden slowly diminishes. It shrinks, lightens, and right at the end, eventually it drops away. And he's a free man. And in Buddhism, in the Buddha's teachings, we are often reminded that we're carrying a burden for as long as we are on the path. And we're born with this burden, karmic burden, weight of karma, of unfinished business. And we have the opportunity through the practice to let go of the burden gradually through insight. And one way of looking at this is to take in the teaching on the upadhis, on the acquisitions. What is the burden made of? What is it we're carrying? And honestly, I think when we know what we're doing, if we recognize we're carrying a burden, that it's painful, that it's heavy, that it's unnecessary to lug it around, then we will quite naturally, automatically put the burden down. So insight is the key to understand, to feel the weight of the burden. When Christian set off on his journey in the Pilgrim's Progress, he didn't know he had a burden initially. If I recall rightly, I think it dawned on him gradually. He began to see over the course of his journey, spiritual journey, the evidence of the burden. He began to feel the burden. It was only then that he was really starting to appreciate the work ahead, and maybe only then that the burden could be shared. Dukkha, first noble truth of dukkha. Dukkha must be understood. We need to see the suffering, feel the suffering, be aware of the suffering in order to be able to let it go. And the letting go is a given. Nobody wants to hold on to a hot brick or put their hand in the fire. So the letting go will happen through insight. And so let's think about these four upadhis. There are four. In the commentaries, there's a description of what is this acquisition when it comes into the teachings. And I think over time today I'll read some verses that mention upadhi, mention acquisition. So this concept comes up in the Buddha's teachings. And in the commentaries, we're given 4 types of upadhi, 4 types of acquisition to consider. And this is a good list, I think. And we can maybe feel out these 4, see what they mean to us, how we may experience these burdens. And what is an acquisition? It's something we've acquired and something we're holding on to until we stop. So these things are things that we're attracted to, we're attached to, we perhaps identify with, and we reify, we make mine, we make me out of. So the 4 I'll just tell you straight off. A karma, that's sense desire. Kilesa, that's the imperfections in the mind, the mental defilements, the unwholesome states and wholesome states that we cling to. So karma, kilesa, and then there's, what's the next one? Khandha. Khandha, the 5 heaps of our experience. The 5 khandhas, the body, perceptions, feelings, mental formations, concepts, conceptualization, and consciousness. So these are another bunch of aspects of acquisition for us. Karma, kilesa, khandha, sense desire, defilements in the mind, and the heaps of existence, what we're made of. These 5 khandhas. And then the 4th is abhisankara, which is the, again, conceptualization, the views, the opinions, the ways in which we create our world mentally, our history, the history, past and future, and all the ways in which we make sense of the world, and then learn to cling to those views about the way things are. So these are aspects of upadhi, of acquisition. So the burden that we're carrying, we can consider, is weighed down by desire, sense desire, by the mental defilements we're carrying, all the concepts we're carrying, the ideation, and by the body itself, perceptions, feelings, and consciousness. And I'm going to read you a sutta from Samyutta Nikaya. I've put some suggested reading in the chat for you to look at, and we'll look at some of these suttas now. And this is quite a poignant sutta. It's called Rulership. It's Samyutta Nikaya 420. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Kosalans in a small forest hut in the Himalayan region. Kosala is where the Buddha's mother was born, her country, and she came over from Kosala to the Sakyan lands across the border, these 2 neighboring countries at the time of the Buddha, his mother from one, his father from the other. And they're up in what's now Nepal, or close to Nepal, up in the north, near the foothills of the Himalayas. The Himalayas are in sight on a clear day from this part of India, what's now India. And it's pertinent that this is where this particular teaching takes place, because actually the Buddha's mother's country and his father's country, where he grew up, fought each other. Even in the Buddha's lifetime, they declared war on each other, and they fought each other. And they were fighting over resources, fighting for water. There was a river that divided, that created the border between their lands, and they fought over the use of that water. And the Buddha couldn't stop them from fighting. He tried to intervene, and his intervention was unsuccessful. Even a Buddha cannot necessarily stop a war from happening. So here we are, the Buddha's dwelling among his mother's people, the Kosalans, in a small forest hut in the Himalayan region. And then when the Blessed One was alone in seclusion, a reflection arose in his mind. Thus, is it possible to exercise rulership righteously without killing and without instigating others to kill? Is it possible to rule righteously without confiscating and without instigating others to confiscate, without sorrowing and without causing sorrow? So this for me is very poignant, because the Buddha was unable to perhaps see around him that possibility of leadership manifesting without harm, without strife, without creating suffering for oneself and others. And I find that very useful to contemplate because of the way it is in the present day, and perhaps in all the time between the Buddha's living 2,500 years ago and our life now. Is it possible to be a leader without harm? It must be very difficult. Perhaps it's not possible. Something to consider. Actually, in this sutta, Mara then comes to visit the Buddha. Mara, the personification of delusion, as we know, comes along and says, "Sir, why don't you exercise rulership righteously without killing and without instigating others to kill, without confiscating and without instigating others to confiscate, without sorrowing and without instigating others to cause sorrow?" And the Buddha said, "Well, why are you saying this to me?" And Mara replies, "You, the Buddha, the Blessed One, you have developed and cultivated in such a way that if you were to wish, you need only resolve that the Himalayas, the king of mountains, should become gold, and it would turn to gold." So Mara's appreciating the qualities of a Buddha, someone who's actually exceedingly powerful and for the good. Perhaps that's where real power comes from. The Buddha could be a good leader, a righteous leader. And the sense I get from the Buddhist scriptures is that actually only a Buddha, or one who's has the capacity to be a Buddha, is capable of such righteous leadership. There are a few examples in history of good leaders. And indeed, in the Buddhist world, King Ashoka became a very righteous Buddhist leader. So it's not perhaps impossible to be something close to a wholesome, entirely wholesome and righteous leader. But the sense I get from the scriptures in the Buddhist teachings is that actually it's virtually impossible, for one would have to be entirely free from suffering oneself, not to inflict suffering upon others in such a position. But Mara is saying to the Buddha, well, you could do anything. You could be a righteous ruler. You can even turn the Himalayas into gold if you decided to do so. Of course, this isn't something that a Buddha would do, friends, but perhaps there's truth in what Mara's saying. The Buddha responds with verses here. He says, if there were a mountain made of gold, made entirely of solid gold, not double this would suffice for one having known this fare evenly. Not even 2 gold mountains would suffice. Knowing this, fare evenly. He goes on to say, how could a person inclined to sensual pleasures, who has seen the source whence suffering springs, having known acquisition as a tie in this world, a person should train for its removal. So this is a wonderful teaching on this topic of upadhi, acquisition. They're a tie in this world, and if we see things clearly, we train for their removal, for the removal of sense desire, of mental defilements, of ideation, of conceptualization, of all of our attachment to the 5 khandhas. And the Buddha is also pointing out here, just to emphasize, even a mountain of gold wouldn't be enough if you have the mind of desire. The Buddha's not going there. He's not going to fulfill any wishes. He doesn't have any wishes to fulfill anymore. There's no wish to lead. He wasn't yearning towards leadership. Mara was trying to get in there and to bring up and make much of some kind of ambition, some kind of desire. But the Buddha has no such burden, no acquisitions. He's free from acquisitions and no wish to lead, no wish to rule, but only the eye that's gazing around and perceiving and appreciating the danger in putting oneself in that position over others, organizing others, looking for power and status and to be in control. The dangers there. This is not to say that we shouldn't have leaders, but perhaps it is an invitation to reflect on what kind of leadership we would want to support, we would want to promote, how to organize ourselves en masse as human beings. It's very difficult to make a good job of this. It's very easy to create a lot of suffering. So this in a way is touching on the acquisition of sense desire, the burden of sense desire, the burden also of kilesa, of any unwholesome intentionality. And I'd like to turn to another sutta to flesh out this consideration of upadhi, of acquisition. And this is a verse that comes up again and again, actually, in Samyutta Nikaya, the collection of short teachings. And this is also from the Book of Verses. This particular teaching comes up in many places. This particular sutta I've got up right now is Samyutta 112, and it's called Delight, Nandiya Sutta. Given at Savatthi. And this is a verse spoken by a devata, a heavenly being, like an angelic being, to the Buddha. And this devata says, one who has children delights in children. One with cattle delights in cattle. Acquisitions truly are a person's delight. Without acquisitions, one does not delight. So here's a being who's come to the Buddha for teaching, and this is where they're at. And devatas, beings in higher realms, as well as fortunate beings in the human realm, of course, we're inclined to delight in good fortune, in comforts, in belongings and possessions, in status, in wealth. And this devata is just reflecting what the worldly view is. what the view of most of us is. Acquisitions truly are a person's delight. Yes, without them, it's pretty miserable. One does not delight. And the Buddha's response is this: one who has sons or children sorrows over children. One who has cattle sorrows over cattle. Acquisitions truly are a person's sorrows. Without acquisitions, one does not sorrow. So the total turnaround, friends. So often in the Dharma teachings, we can see that worldly aims and values are like a current or a stream or a river flowing in one direction. And the Dharma teachings are like a current or a stream that's flowing in precisely the opposite direction. It's very interesting to turn things around and to do this for ourselves, when we're assailed with desire, or when we find we find ourselves relishing comfort and stability and possessions and all the things that are bound to be taken away from us at some point. But we forget that. We don't want to think about that, and we can find ourselves delighting in this realm. And it's very natural that we do this, but we really want to wake up to the danger, which is anicca, which is that all things are flowing on by. Can we hold things lightly and be willing to let them go just like that? And recognizing this teaching is the way to help us to kind of come to this right attitude, come to this clarity of seeing things the way they actually are, which is the opposite of holding to and delighting in. With our acquisitions, we want to recognize that they are a source of sorrow for us. Everyone we know and love, we're going to lose them. Everything we know and love, it could go up in flames tomorrow. This very body, it's on death row. So there's nothing here that we can not sorrow from if we hold to it, if we make it an acquisition. It's like we're throwing it on the burden on our back, throwing on the extra weight. Bowed down with that weight, we suffer. If we're not suffering now, then we'll be suffering later. And so to recognize this and to appreciate is everything. It enables us to let go. It enables us to see sense desire as an enemy. It's not a friend. It's a delusory experience. It's entrapping us. It's snaring us. It's imprisoning us. Can we rise above? Can we step back from and observe sense desire as it arises? Not acquire it, but leave it be and watch it fade away and taste the freedom of not being caught up, not being deluded by sense desires. So all these acquisitions come about as a result of desire and wanting. And it's not to say that we don't use things. The monastics make use of food, shelter, clothing, and medicines when sick. And we can always have a relationship with the world because we have bodies, and it behooves us to keep them alive and keep them healthy, just to take care of them so that we can practice well. So in this taking care of the body, we are using resources all the time, but to have the attitude towards them, which is of gratitude, appreciation, and a hands-off approach. Just this much. I'll just take what I need. I won't accumulate more. I won't store up more for some future occasion. I know that this is a monastic way of practice and not a layperson's way of practice. However, these reflections are for all of us. In lay life, we have so many, in a way, invitations to accumulate and acquire and amass, possessions, also ways of thinking and being, habits. And just in exactly the same way, we want to get the right attitude to our acquisitions, to our relationship with the world around us, so that we are grateful, using what we need and not taking more than that. If we have to have houses with insurances and mortgages and cars and bank accounts and so forth, that doesn't have to be an obstacle for us. It's a difficult, it's a difficult course to chart, and yet the same teaching applies. Let's not amass, let's not hold to ourselves any sense of ownership, any sense of um, taking more than we need, any habits around luxuriating in what we have, and tread lightly, be generous, give away what we don't need, and hold to things lightly. Generosity is a great help for us because, when we give things away and we make a practice of this, just as in Islam, the encouragement is to give 20% of one's wealth away to others. What a great training. If we train ourselves in generosity and get used to and consistently, give a proportion of our incomes, of our possessions away, then we are so helped to, first of all, we're developing goodness, but also we're enabling ourselves to lighten our hold on things, to recognize that this is really not mine anyway. Let me allow things to flow through. And let me, whatever I do keep here for this one, or for this family, or for this community, let me hold it lightly. And generosity helps us to do this. It's difficult for us to loosen the grasp on our acquisitions. And so we want to be working with this constantly, consistently. Recognize upadi, recognize the habit, the tendency to acquire, and be willing to keep going against that inclination and developing this beautiful alternative inclination of sharing and giving, and just enough, and no more for this one. So this is not just for the monastics, this is for all of us, to enable us to live in a way that's benefiting ourselves and others, and also really encouraging ourselves on the spiritual path. So I think I'll pick up on another teaching now. Just love reading these verses. There's another set of verses here from there's a monk called Vangisa, who many of you will have heard of. He's a poet. He's like the bard in the Buddhist Pali Canon. He's the bard, he's the poet, and he often, on listening to the Buddha's teachings, Vangisa is inspired and always requests very respectfully of the Buddha, can I share some verses that have come to me? And the Buddha invariably encourages him to share, and he bursts into these beautiful verses of appreciation and enthusiasm for the teaching. So here is an exclamation from Vangisa. And actually, on this occasion, Vangisa's struggling. He's not yet an arahant, and he's assailed with lust. He says, I've become dissatisfied. Lust is infecting my mind. How is it possible, he asks himself, how is it possible for someone else to dispel my discontent and give rise to satisfaction? Why don't I do it myself? So this is a beautiful reflection for us to take in. Just to pause here, because how wonderful is this? Someone who's assailed with lust, longing, probably for another, the body of another, and recognizing that if I go in that direction of slaking, appeasing this lust, will that get rid of it? Will that be the end of it? And realizing that no, that is not going to be the end of it. If we follow our lust, then we're just going to make more lust and create a habit of following that lust. Why don't I do it myself? He says, why don't I deal with this myself? Why don't I let it stay here and work with it? So this, of course, is path. And I'm not saying that everybody has to be celibate all the time, but it is very helpful for us to pay attention to sexual feelings, any kind of desires that arise in the mind and body, and not immediately succumb, not immediately follow them, because then we are acquiring more weight, more burden. If we want to shed the burden, it really behooves us to pause and feel those feelings and just recognize that they don't have to be followed. They have a life, and it's a short one often. We can burn for a while and then we cool down and we're free. We're that much freer than we were before. So here, Vangesa's working with lust in a skillful way as a monk. He is going to deal with it himself. On that occasion of dispelling his own discontent and giving rise to satisfaction through not following desire and coming to the end of desire and feeling the satisfaction of that, he then recited these verses. So Vangesa's verses on this occasion, he says, giving up discontent and desire, along with all thoughts of domestic life, they would not get entangled in anything. Unentangled, undesiring, that is a real mendicant. That is the goal of our practice. He goes on, whether here on earth or in the air, whatever in the world is included in form, it wears out. It's all impermanent. The thoughtful live having comprehended this truth. Anicca sanya, let's cultivate this perception of impermanence. So helpful for our practice. He goes on, people are bound to their attachments, to what is seen, to what is heard, felt, and thought. Unstirred, dispel desire for these things. For one who's called a sage does not cling to any of these acquisitions, this burden, putting it down piece by piece through insight. Such a one is called a sage. Attached to wrong views and full of their own opinions, ordinary people are fixed in wrong principles. But the mendicant would not join a sectarian group, still less would they utter crude speech. Clever, long serene, free of deceit, alert, without envy, the sage has reached a state of peace. Quenched, he awaits the time, awaits the end of life. We're not waiting to die exactly, I don't think, in this verse, but rather no thought for any future, no unfinished business. And just to come back to the wrong views this aspect of Upadhi, one of the four aspects, Abhisankara Upadhi, the holding to ideas and views. And it's very interesting here that Vangisa speaks about how a mendicant, a practitioner, would not join any sectarian group. So that's very worthy of consideration for us. The mind has the inclination when we create. Sankhara, mental formations, are of the nature of divisiveness, separation. We take a view and then we're turning our mind away from other possibilities, or even sometimes we adopt a particular view and then there will be an opposing view that we will then find ourselves arguing with, disagreeing with. And so to hold to any particular ideas or concepts is to narrow down our awareness, and to hold to that as a view or an opinion, to hold to any kind of view or opinion at all, is to create suffering for ourselves and potentially fall into disputes, arguments, battles, harm. So it's really interesting to consider this, friends. When we hold to any kind of creed, any kind of sectarian approach, any group view about things, then we are stepping into quite dangerous spaces. And it's really good to be aware of that, isn't it? When we live in societies where there's great division around views and opinions, how to live, how to rule, how to relate to others, and good to consider great caution around our thoughts and ideas about whatever, which always feel correct and right. We feel, I wouldn't think this way if it wasn't right. Of course it's right, but is it right? Is it helpful to make it so? Is it helpful to hold to any kind of view at all? I'd like to finish with another teaching which kind of is an extension of this investigation. And again, in the Book of Verses, this is in the chapter on bhikkhunis, and a bhikkhuni called Sisupachala, sitting at the foot of a tree, meditating in the forest alone. And she's visited by Mara, visited by delusion, challenged by Mara. And Mara says to Sisupachala, "Whose creed do you approve of, bhikkhuni?" And her response is, "I don't approve of anyone's creed." Mara goes on to say, "Under whom have you shaved your head? You do appear to be an ascetic, yet you don't approve of any creed. So why are you wandering around as if bewildered?" So the challenge from Mara to Bhikkhuni Sisupachala is, what are you doing? If you don't have any particular ideas about practice, or you're not following any particular belief system, then what are you doing? And so there is, for me, in this teaching, a recognition that we are very liable to want to hold to some solid or clear creed or belief system, even if it's dubious, just so that we have something to hold to, we have something to cleave to, we have some sense of guidance and direction. And again, when we reflect broadly, in the world around us, looking at the world around us, looking at history, we can see how the human tendency is so strong for people en masse to cleave to particular creeds, particular belief systems, and to make them right, to make them, in a way, the only way, and then to clash, of course, as a result of that, with those who hold different creeds, who have different cultures, different ways of doing things, different ways of relating to life. So it's, these teachings are always so extensive and so applicable. They're timeless, are they not? The timeless Dharma. Bhikkhuni Sisupachala, she's not fazed by this visitation from Mara, challenging her creedlessness. She responds in this way. She says, outside here, the followers of creeds place their confidence in views. I don't approve of their teachings. They are not skilled in the Dharma. So that's very interesting. The Dhamma, she's saying, is not a creed. It's not a view. And isn't this so, friends? Of course, many of us know the Kalama Sutta, where the Buddha's encouraging the Kalama people to drop their need to seek out a belief system. They are asking the Buddha. The Kalama people lived in a place where there were lots of visitors passing through, lots of spiritual teachers coming and going, so many different creeds, so many different possibilities presented to them. They were confused. Which one should we follow? And when they asked the Buddha, he was saying to them, drop them all. Don't follow any creed. Don't believe anything you're told. Don't believe anything you read in the scriptures. Don't believe anything just because it's been handed down to you generation by generation. These ways in which we learn and get conditioned are so powerful. They're so compelling. We want to fit in. We want to be part of a group. It's a sense of safety that this gives us. It's a sense of security. It's a sense of knowing something. It's a sense of ground, but all of it is very shaky. There's no security in beliefs. And the Kalama people were encouraged by the Buddha not even to believe what he was saying to them, but to find out the truth for themselves through their own experience, through their own insight, to develop their own wisdom. And when we develop wisdom, isn't it so? What we learn is to let go of views, to let go of this burden, to let go of any acquisitions we might have around the way things are. Our views will always be limited. They'll always be part true at best, and complete fabrications at worst. So to drop the views. So she's saying, this is not skill in Dharma. She's not following a creed. She's simply practicing the Dharma, which is to investigate the truth for herself. The Buddha didn't teach a creed. There is no belief system in Buddhism, as we know. How wonderful is that? How possible is it to turn back to maybe belief systems that we've been encouraged to follow in different religions, say, or different political groupings, or different ideas about history and the way things are? How much we've been encouraged to be conditioned. How wonderful to turn our Dhamma eye to all of that and to just let it blow away. Let it go, shed the burden, step freely forward and investigate the truth. And in our investigation of the truth, most of that process, I find, friends, is one of recognizing, well, it's not this, it's not that, not this, not that. Neti, neti. This seems to be the way. It's discarding that which is not true leads us inexorably closer to that which is true. Sisupachala goes on to say, there is one born in the Sakyan clan, the enlightened one, without an equal, conqueror of all, Mara's subduer, who everywhere is undefeated, everywhere freed and unattached, the one with vision who sees all, attained to the end of all karma, liberated in the extinction of acquisitions. That blessed one is my teacher. His is the teaching I approve. That is the Dhamma. Ayya. So thank you, friends, for your patient listening. And I'm going to have a look at the chat, and I'm inviting comments, questions, reflections. Thank you for being here. Those who've shared greetings, very good to practice with you all again. And I'd like to share a comment here from Madeline. Thank you, Madeline, who says, I understand anicca, having experienced the loss of 2 husbands in my life, but I still delight in the love of my grandchildren, now grown and living their own lives. Being a grandmother is a joy. Sadhu. It's beautiful sharing. Thank you, Madeline. Yeah, losing 2 husbands, how painful and how much to be let go of. And, you know, as a monastic, I've not married. Actually, in my previous life, as Ayya so more often says, my life before this life, in my previous life, in my life as a layperson, I had relationships, but didn't actually go so far as to get married or to have children. And so this aspect of life I'm not, I have no experience of, but certainly I've also experienced loss, as I'm imagining every single one of us have. And so we can immediately resonate. Yes, to lose a loved one is such a wake-up call for us, friends, is it not? And of course, we grieve and mourn. And then, as Madeline's pointing out, the course of life flows on and we find our happiness again. And what do we take happiness in? We take happiness in what is now, what is here. The family that we have around us, the people around us, the situation we're in. And actually, so much of the path of practice, this letting go of acquisitions, is about letting go of the past and also letting go of the future. These acquisitions are very heavy burdens for us when we dwell in that which is not present, past and future. And so much of the teaching is pointing to this freedom from those heavy acquisitions of past and future and being present. What's happening now? Who's here now? What can I do now to serve, to support, to free up? How can I be mindful now? And how can I be generous now? And so we have the Eightfold Path, friends. And each one of these aspects of the path, how we live, how we work, the way we speak, our meditation practice and our development on the path, all of these aspects are right here for us to hone, to purify, to polish, to perfect over time. Thank you, Madeline, for your lovely sharing there. And we got a question here from Sud. Thank you, Sud. How should one engage in things like food given? That although it is a sense pleasure, it's also very important to have nutrition. What should be one's attitude towards needs in lay life? That's a really good question. Thank you, Sud. this whole area of food, nutrition. It's a big part of our practice for all of us, because this is one of the worldly possessions or experiences that is something we have to work with. We can't put aside food. We can't let food go altogether, or we'll very quickly die. No, we have to eat every day. And so this can be a really wonderful opportunity for us to develop our mindfulness around eating, around taste, around desire for food, how much to indulge in eating, how to know when we've had enough, and to get the right measure of the food. The Buddha spoke so much about this. Both eating and sleeping are aspects of our life that we are always fine-tuning. We're always, aren't we, balancing and learning how to get it just right. And it is a work in progress for all of us. And it's a rich field. I would say in monastic life, of course, it's fairly protected, and it's easier for monastics to work with eating and food because we're not picking and choosing. We're not even often preparing food. So we're not spending a lot of time in the kitchen. We're not going out shopping and so forth. So there's less mental attention that needs to be paid to this aspect. Just the eating, just the choosing at the counter, at the servery, in the moment, what we're going to eat, the eating of the food, and then it's done for the day. But for lay people, it's a much more extensive practice, and that is no bad thing. So you get to choose what you eat, you get to go shopping, you get to prepare the food, and then you get to eat just the right amount. And I would say that some things that come to my mind when going shopping, to be aware, how much is there hunger in the body? How much is greed arising? How much is desire arising? How much do I incline towards favorite this and favorite that and make it into treats and highlights of my life? How much do I have gluttony and greed arising in the mind around shopping, around preparing food? And that is something to wake up to and keep working with. And I notice things like, for instance, if you go shopping and you're hungry, you're more likely to get the things that you particularly desire in that moment. If one goes shopping on a full stomach, it's a much more calm experience. This is what you would expect, and it's good just to be aware of and practice with different circumstances. The other thing to say about control, having control and agency around food and eating, is to share. I can't remember where in the suttas, but I'm almost certain that somewhere the Buddha states that if we're wise, we would not have a meal without sharing it with others, with another, with others. And even the monastics, we can do this. We can share our food with animals, with birds, with creatures out in nature, even insects, we can do that. And we're also encouraged as monastics to share what we have in our bowls with one another freely as needed. And that's a really good encouragement. So to be aware of the precious resource that food is, how fortunate we are if we're not going hungry, if we actually have enough to eat, how actually not normal that is in the world, even in this day and age. And so to take encouragement from the Buddha's teaching to be mindful of sharing. And it can mean, giving money to charity. It can mean sharing your food by giving food away to others, or it can mean inviting others to take food with oneself. In family life, it's a given. You're feeding others, Every time you eat, pretty much as a parent, you'll be feeding others. How wonderful is that? So to have the attitude towards food of using it as practice and using it to watch the mind, be aware of liking and disliking, be aware of any defilements that come up in the mind, and let this, as in all aspects, be an opportunity to develop generosity and other wholesome qualities. So thank you, Sud, for that question. And okay, we have 5 minutes. Just looking through comments. There's quite a few, so I'm going to be very brief, but let's see how I can meet these various questions. Thank you, Heike. Heike says, thanks for the timely reminder of letting go. It seems so difficult to find the middle path between holding on and turning away from something or someone because of aversion. Yeah, the middle way, it's such a refinement of practice, isn't it? And such a wonderful concept to use for our practice so that we're constantly aware of that tendency to veer into liking or disliking, and to notice those defilements of the mind as they arise and to let them go is to really, in a way, step into the unknown. So, how do I relate to this person? How much do I relate to this person? Well, I've no idea. Let me be guided by my mindfulness around liking and disliking and the letting go, and just see where that takes me. We can really trust, can't we? And we can develop great faith in this path of practice when our attention is focused on purifying the heart. Everything else follows from that. Thanks, Heike. And okay, thank you, Sud, again. Sud says it's a little bit off topic. That's okay. But what does the Buddha say about with constant storytelling that happens in the mind as one goes about one's day? Seems like a lot of suffering stems out of it. Absolutely. Absolutely. In a way, this is the abhisankarupadi, the acquisition of thought, higher thought, our incredible ability to weave stories, to have a constant running commentary going on. These minds are incredible. They are so fast, they are so intelligent, they're so creative. And so to work with all of that, to work with the mind that's constantly throwing up, ideas and concepts and ways of relating to reality. Personally, you could say, bracket that under the title, under the heading of the enemy of doubt. So the mind that is spinning out and creating. I don't believe my thoughts at all. I don't think very much. But when I do have thoughts arise in the mind, I question them. It's a bit like the Byron Katie approach, this extraordinary spiritual teacher in America whose teaching is to question your thoughts and really figure, are they really true? And more often than not, the answer is a very quick no. And sometimes the no takes a little bit longer. So to really question our thoughts, not to believe our thoughts, helps us to put them aside more quickly. So this acquisition of abhisankara, of thinking, we don't want to hold on to that. Don't let that be a burden. We don't need to think very much at all. We can let our thoughts go. If anything has to be thought through, anything needs to be done, it will happen through the process of relinquishment of thinking. That might sound really strange and impossible, but in my experience, it is the way to not hold to thinking, we will find ourselves stepping forward, just as in Heike's example, how to figure these relationships. If we don't think about them, but we rather keep practicing moment by moment, awareness, letting go, then these questions about what we should be doing and how we should behave, they take care of themselves. Our work is simply to wake up, moment by moment, friends. Thank you very much, Sid, and I hope that makes sense. And okay, just very briefly, thank you, Max. Max says, is it okay to optimize diet around its mental effects? Do you have any thoughts on the role of fasting in the practice? Thank you. That's great. Yeah, I think, Max, it's really good to eat healthily and to figure out what's good for this mind and body. Absolutely. So, say if you get really agitated when you have coffee and can be a bit irritable, then what a good idea just to let go of having coffee. Things like that, we can really notice what foods suit us, what foods are helpful for us, and incline towards the ones that are helpful and healthy for us. And just let go of things that create problems, either physically or mentally or emotionally. Yeah. And the role of fasting, yeah, I think fasting is extremely valuable when it's undertaken in a sensible way, so we're not creating any harm or unhealth in the body. Some people can fast for ages, others don't do well at all with fasting. So again, knowing your body type, knowing what's good for you. But if you're someone who can fast profitably for the health of the body, then it's a really wonderful thing to do, because it really helps us to, in a way, step back from the world of food, and our relationship can really change significantly, and a lot of insight can come about through fasting. And also, of course, the mind is very released as the body is free from digestion. We're very alert, awake, and the mind is very bright, very sharp, and it's wonderful to meditate when we're fasting. So if it's possible, to really cautiously investigate this, absolutely, it's a great practice. And finally, we have Spencer. Thank you, Spencer. Is it more accurate to view Buddhist teachings like the Four Noble Truths and impermanence as a belief system as well? Brilliant. Yeah. The Four Noble Truths and impermanence, are they a belief system as well? Well, isn't it the case we hear these teachings and we might think, either I'm going to believe in that or I'm not going to believe in that. But either way, the purpose of these teachings, and the Buddha really emphasized this so many times in so many places in his teachings, is to put them into practice. So whatever, the Four Noble Truths is a conceptual framework. Is it true or not? I have no idea. But let me see if I can apply it to my experience and see if it helps, see if it has any benefit to do so. And the concept of impermanence, is it true or not? Let's see. One doesn't need to believe in these things. They're not actually belief systems. They're just ideas and concepts that are either true or not true. And it's for us to see for ourselves whether they have any validity, whether they have any value, whether they are worth investigating further. So, yeah, the Buddha was very clearly not giving us a creed to follow, Spencer, but rather, giving us some guidance, some information from the perspective of somebody who's entirely free from suffering. And that information we can really, if we feel inclined, we can really make use of in order to free our hearts from suffering. but it's for each person to investigate for themselves. The Dharma is to be experienced individually by the wise. So thank you, Spencer, and thanks everyone for your questions, comments, and for your participation, and above all for your good practice. Let's finish by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.